Hello, Darshan Maharaja here. I'm sure today's topic will surprise a lot of people, and some on the political right may disagree with me. But I think I'm on the right track here. My conclusion is that small c conservatives will not become a potent political force in Canada. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think I'm right, unless the winds of social change uh, move drastically in the other direction, which does not appear likely, although you cannot rule out the possibility. Unforeseen things do happen, have happened throughout history. But currently, this is my assessment that small c conservatives will not become a potent political force in Canada. Now, I have reached this conclusion based on three broad factors. The first one is disinterest in politics. I'm sure a lot of people will be screaming at me saying, no, you are wrong, we are engaged, etc. I'll explain what I mean by disinterest in politics shortly. So, after disinterest in politics, we have lack of strategic cohesion on the political right. I'm talking about small c conservatives here. Then there is the deep integration of foreign disputes in Canadian politics, where being against any particular party uh, in that dispute automatically puts one at a disadvantage politically. And given how deeply these have become integrated, it is difficult to put oneself in opposition to that and prevail. And finally, I'll talk about accumulation of capital, my understanding of it, and how it relates to this discussion. Now, let's start. When I say small c conservatives are disinterested in politics, this thought grew out of my something that I had mentioned in my previous video about the Mississauga issue, where there was an uproar in 2017 about Muslim students being allowed time off during school hours on Fridays for prayers, because Friday is the main day of prayer for Muslims. And I was coming from the same kind of background that the objectors were coming from, because as I mentioned in that video, when I was in school, if a classmate of mine or schoolmate of mine who was a Muslim, if he or she had requested time off during school hours to pray on Fridays, the first person to slap them silly would have been their parent, because their argument would have been that we are sending you to school to study, not to pray. If you want to pray, go to a mosque, don't go to school, or stay at home. So, I was kind of seeing the point of the people who were objecting to prayers being allowed in schools. Their argument was that we stopped the Lord's Prayer in schools, in public schools, because uh, we wanted to be accommodative of other religions. And how is then another religion being allowed to be practiced in schools? But then somebody pointed out that this policy had in fact been made in 1996, 21 years ago. Nobody had paid attention to that policy when it was made. There might have been some opposition, but after that it must have died down. The key fact is this: the policy was being implemented in schools, and Muslim students were praying on Fridays, taking time off from their class, and nobody noticed. The issue blew up because there were previously six pre-approved sermons that had been prepared by imams and been okayed by the school board. And then the demand arose from either the students or the parents of students that students should be free to give any kind of sermon that they want, not the pre-approved ones only. And the school board said no, and the parents claimed that this was Islamophobia because officials were afraid that something offensive or objectionable may be said in those sermons by the students. So that is when the whole issue blew up. And then suddenly everybody started voicing opposition to students being allowed to pray in school. But the policy had existed for 21 years. So when I say that they are disinterested in politics, what I mean is the day to day functioning, the nuts and bolts of policies, rules, regulations, bylaws, etc. When that is happening, unfortunately, our media is not good enough at reporting these. If you are really serious about knowing what's happening, at least in the parliament at the federal level, you can subscribe to Blacklock's reporter. Their subscription is $314 a year, which may sound like a lot. And I know everybody is in a tight spot currently. Our economic condition of the country is not good. But this works out to $26 and a few cents per month. So one has to make that choice. If it is possible for you to spare that $26 and few cents a month, then you can remain informed of what is happening, at least in Ottawa, because Blacklock's reports based on freedom of information requests and attending the parliamentary committee meetings. So that is where the nuts and bolts of federal politics works actually. The second example I want to give is motion M44. You know, I have been hammering on that for more than 1.5 years, which was passed in May 2022. Nobody knew about it, including yours truly. But I stumbled upon it sometime in early 2024, and ever since then, I have been hammering on that. I have also pointed out that no media have taken up the issue, either in the mainstream media sphere or the independent media, the uh, content creators on YouTube and other social media platforms. Nobody has taken that up. And that motion M44 is at the root of this mass immigration crisis, which has led to other crises on multiple fronts. Nobody knew about it. So this is where it boils down to, that the leftists keep pushing their policies on all these forums publicly. They are not being secretive about it. But if I don't know about it, it's because I'm not taking sufficient interest in how politics functions at the grassroots level, at the nuts and bolts level. So that is what I mean by disinterest in politics. Now let us come to lack of strategic cohesion. I'll start with the example of Rupa Subramania, the journalist, who was probably the only journalist giving an objective report on the truckers' convoy in Ottawa. And she won a lot of accolades for that. She disproved the allegation that this was racist, xenophobic, whatever label kind of protest, because she showed that people of all races and all backgrounds were uh, participating in the protest against the vaccine mandates. And later on, but less than 2 years later, when a controversy arose about the statue of Hindu deity Hanuman at one of the temples in Brampton, because the statue is 55 feet tall, and then a lot of people did not like that it was being put there. And she defended that on grounds of constitutionally protected right to religion. First of all, this was private property. Secondly, uh, there is private funding, there is no public funding. And then there is the matter of religious rights. So she defended that, caught a lot of flack from the same people who praised her for her coverage of the truckers' convoy. And the same people who were vociferously talking in favor of individual rights were suddenly somehow against the individual rights of a particular religious community. I'm not saying this because I happen to be born in a Hindu family. As I have said often, I'm not particularly religious. There was a similar controversy in Mississauga many years ago when there was a proposed mosque being built, and the people making the proposal had asked for a height for the minarets for 80 feet. And ultimately, it was approved at, I believe, 66 feet or thereabouts. So there was discussion about that. And that is the way to settle these disputes. You have hearings at the municipal level, and then whoever has an objection to it can put their case forward, and then a compromise is arrived at, or the proposal gets rejected. I'm open to that. But once that process has happened in a democratic manner, I don't think there is any ground to oppose what is being done, which is what a lot of small c conservatives did in relation to the statue of Hanuman, the Hindu deity. So their commitment to principles or charter rights is kind of flexible. A lot of arguments were kind of interesting because some people said it is an eyesore, it is ugly. One journalist said that, independent journalist, he said that Hindus are signaling they are taking over, words to that effect. So when someone is in compliance with the law in exercise of their charter protected right, it should not depend on anybody else's approval. So, as I said, how does this relate to strategic cohesion? Is because when you want to be united, you have to be willing to um, look past these minor differences. And I'm saying minor because the case is solid in my mind that this was in compliance with law and in exercise of charter protected rights. So that's a minor difference, that you don't like the aesthetic looks of what is being put in place. Now, secondly, when somebody talks about, like yours truly, somebody talks about racism online, a lot of people come out. I don't know if they are small c conservatives or farther to the right, but they make all sorts of unsavory comments, and that erodes the support for the small c conservative side in the targeted community. Whereas the left, although we know them for being very enthusiastic about canceling people at the slightest pretext, they have this sense of strategic cohesion, which is why uh, even though Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada got a record percentage of votes, they could not win the election because all the, or almost all the supporters and voters of the NDP went over to the Liberal side. That is what I call strategic cohesion. They put aside all their differences and said, hey, you know what? We need to do this. We'll sort out our differences later. That kind of, I can only call it maturity, political maturity. That is sadly somehow lacking on the small c conservative side. Then there are these foreign disputes, notably in the current social climate, relating to the Israel-Palestine conflict and the war in Gaza and the Khalistan issue. Now, these have become so deeply entwined or integrated in Canadian politics. Early last year, I made a podcast saying that our faulty definition of multiculturalism has devolved into multipoliticalism. Because my definition of multiculturalism is when the same uh, individual is able to occupy more than one cultural space. But that is difficult to do for someone belonging to one culture to learn another culture sufficiently well enough to be able to practice it. So then we go for the low hanging fruit, which is espousing the cause of one side in a foreign dispute. That makes us feel nice, especially on the left, but that is the dominant side right now. So I'm using the pronoun we. And therefore, it becomes very difficult for anyone to take either a neutral stance, saying, hey, there are wrongs being committed on both sides, or to take the side of the other party in the foreign dispute. I mean, it is possible, but it puts you on losing ground. So that is something structural to the political right, where if they are not willing to compromise on their principles, then they will be on the losing side. So all these three factors lead to the final conclusion, which is accumulation of capital. And I don't mean just financial capital. My view is that capital formation is made possible by current inflows. Whatever is saved from current inflows, just like your income, you set aside something for your mortgage or for a down payment or your RSP or RESP, that becomes capital. The accumulation of the remainder of the current inflows becomes capital, not just in the financial sense, also in the cultural sense. When we say we have cultural capital, it is accumulation over a period of time. Similarly, there is political capital, and that political capital cannot accumulate because of all these factors: disinterest in politics, lack of strategic cohesion, and the existence in places of prominence of foreign disputes in Canadian politics. This is not to say that the Conservative Party of Canada will never win the election, because that is cyclical. We know that at some point the incumbent government becomes unpopular enough, it becomes tired enough, it has accumulated enough baggage, that is negative capital in the political sense, that they get voted out and the other guy gets voted in. But that will not be a victory for small c conservatives. And let me give you an example of this. When I was talking about this statue issue, uh, recently also it erupted because there were a couple of other temples, Hindu temples, where similar statues were put up of other Hindu deities. Someone whom I respect said that just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. So I did not get into an argument there, but if I did, then my counter argument would have been that that is a laudable ideal on a voluntary basis for an individual, but it cannot be enforced on someone else. Like, try saying that in terms of someone's right to vote. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. No, they have the freedom to vote for whichever party they want. It may be the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Greens, PPC, or even the Rhino Party. If they want to vote for that party, then, or an independent even, it need not be a party. You can't say that just because you can doesn't mean you should. As I said, it is a laudable ideal to follow voluntarily in a personal capacity, but it cannot be enforced or imposed on others. If they are doing something that is within their rights, then nobody has the right to complain about it unless somebody else's right is being infringed. Then there has to be a compromise made between two competing or conflicting rights. So as long as this kind of uh, I hate to say this, but this kind of misguided thinking is in place, then it will become more and more difficult for the small c conservatives to accumulate enough political capital to become a potent political force in Canada. That is how I have reached this conclusion. Let me know in the comments what you think. Until we meet again, goodbye and be well.